Hi guys, my name is Ross Hoddinott and today I'm going to show you how to take better photographs of butterflies and insects. Insects is one of my favourite subjects and I've been photographing miniature things ever since I was a child. But this is quite a difficult area as subjects tend to be quite skittish and technically it's quite challenging because of the shallow depth of field created by shooting at high magnification. But first things first, let's locate a subject. One of the things that appeals to me most about close-up photography is its great accessibility, and it doesn't really matter where you live, you're never going to be far from insects. Even your very own back garden can be a great place to look for subjects. But I tend to look at wetlands and meadows and reserves for my subjects, and this is a perfect place to begin our search for subjects. As you can see, it's a beautiful sunny day, which is the perfect kind of weather to find insects. And actually here, there's loads of activity, lots of dragonflies and damselflies buzzing about. So I think I made a good choice coming to this pond. Of course, the problem is at this time of day, when it's really warm, insects tend to be very, very active, and that makes life very difficult as a photographer. There's certainly no opportunity for me to set up a tripod here, so I'm going to have to shoot handheld, which is going to make my life much, much harder because depth of field is so shallow. When you're stalking insects, there's a few things you can do to actually increase your chances of success. For instance, dragonflies tend to be quite territorial, and I've noticed there's one regularly coming to a grass over here. So I'm hoping that by standing close by and just waiting for it to come back, I can then gently get myself into position and take a photograph. I've got to just be careful though that my shadow doesn't go over the subject, and that's something you should always be very careful about when you're taking photographs of insects, because that can often alarm it, scare it away. And also I'm going to be very careful that as I move into position, I don't disturb any of these surrounding grasses, because again, insects tend to be very kind of wary of any kind of vibrations and movements. So I'm just going to wait for this dragonfly to come back and then gently get myself in position. I don't know whether you can see, but there's a broad-bodied chaser dragonfly just in front of me, and it's on quite a nice stem. There's not too many distracting reeds in front of it or behind it, which is good. So I'm just going to slowly try and get myself into position. Being very careful again of my shadow, which is getting quite close to the subject now. Such a beautiful insect, it really is. And one of the great things about close-up photography is you get to see these subjects in frame filling close up and you get to really understand and see their beauty. Thankfully it's not too windy today, which is also helpful. Wind can be a real problem with insect photography. Even the slightest movement is exaggerated in close up. This dragonfly is behaving really well at the minute. Just getting a little bit closer again. Fantastic. Right, I'm going to try not to disturb it and just ease myself away now. I'm often asked how best to compose images of insects, but the reality is there is no great right or wrong, and it will greatly depend on your subject and the kind of effect you're trying to achieve. The one thing I would say is just keep things simple. Don't cram too much into the frame, and I'm not personally a great fan of images which are really frame filling. I think it's often good to kind of include a little bit of space just to create some scale and context. Insects are obviously very small subjects, so in order to take good close-ups, you're going to need either a close-up attachment or a macro lens. Close-up filters and extension tubes are a great way to convert existing lenses into close-up lenses, but ideally I would go for a macro lens. Optically they're superb, they're optimised for close focusing, and my preference is for a telephoto macro lens like this one. This is 200mm and it provides a larger working distance, which then minimises the risk of me disturbing my subject. But really any macro lens over 100mm is a really good length for insect photography. One of the most challenging aspects of insect photography is achieving sharp images. Depth of field is incredibly shallow when you shoot at higher magnifications, which means your focusing has to be pinpoint accurate. So when you're shooting, I would suggest with larger subjects, continue to use autofocus. But when you shoot at higher magnifications, consider switching to manual focus where you can be a bit more precise and a little bit more accurate. And one of the things I do when I shoot with manual focus, especially if I'm shooting handheld, is I will pre-focus my lens to a level of magnification that I want for that subject. And then I will just literally bring the camera to my eye and push forward until the subject's in focus. And as it enters the focal plane, then I'll take a small continuous burst of shots of just 2 or 3 images, and then I'll repeat that again. So you end up kind of almost gently rocking backwards and forwards, and every time your subject comes through the focal plane, take a shot, and that should help maximise your chances of capturing really, really sharp images when you're shooting handheld. I'm often asked what is the best aperture for insect photography, and the unhelpful answer is there is no such thing. It will very much depend on the subject and the kind of effect you're trying to achieve. However, I tend to shoot with the largest aperture that I can get away with in order to achieve a fairly shallow background and also to generate a relatively fast shutter speed. And so I typically find myself working at apertures around 5.6 regularly, but it will depend very much on the subject you're shooting. One thing I just want to discuss is insect ethics. There are some photographers out there that do some pretty nasty things to their subjects in order to get their photographs. And I just want to encourage you to always take care of your subject. Just like any other animal, the subject must always come first. And I take all of my photographs in situ, in the wild. I never restrain my subject, and I certainly would do nothing to damage it. And I really encourage you to do exactly the same thing. After a long day in the sun, the golden hour is now upon us and the conditions are just perfect. Now the temperature is dropping, the insects are becoming less and less active, which is why shooting in the evening and also early in the morning is such a good idea. And I've got a butterfly on a grass in front of me now, which is in a nice position. Now, one of the big advantages of shooting at this time of day when insects are less active is you can start to use a tripod. And that is great for stability, obviously, but it also allows me to focus with a lot more precision. So for this shot now, I'm going to activate my live view. And being able to focus via live view is fantastic because now it means that I can magnify the subject and really focus on that fine detail, which is great for insects. It's fantastic. So I'm just going to magnify this butterfly, and I'm focusing manually because that gives me a bit more precision. And the other advantage you have when you shoot in live view is being able to review depth of field and making sure that you're achieving the correct level. And looking at my shot here, f11 is giving me sufficient sharpness while throwing the background out of focus. And now, take my shot. I'm so much more control by shooting in this way. One of the biggest considerations when you photograph insects is light, but obviously when you're stalking insects, you have no control over the lighting, and it's only when they become less active in the evenings and also early in the morning that you can perhaps begin to manipulate or alter the light. And you can do that using a number of different lighting aids. I always tend to carry a reflector with me and also a small LED device, and both of these things are fantastic for just relieving shadows or potentially for adding a little bit of creative backlight into your subject. I also tend to carry a diffuser with me, which can be quite good in situations where the light is actually quite harsh, and all of those things are quite useful lighting aids when you're shooting close-ups. Personally, I don't generally use flash. Obviously, it has its place in insect photography, but I prefer to use the kind of the continuous light forms and the reflectors. But ultimately, there is absolutely no substitute for beautiful golden sunlight, and that's one of the reasons why I do most of my insect photography either early in the morning or late in the evening when the light is naturally beautiful. I hope that's given you some ideas and inspiration to take your own insect images this summer, and don't forget to subscribe to Nature TTL's YouTube channel.